man stumbled through the drifts of orange leaves collecting under the bare trees. He looked back over his shoulder at the manor and surrounding buildings, vaguely silhouetted by the setting sun. He stopped in the middle of the clearing to catch his breath. Selden was a man of about average height and about middle age, though his ragged appearance made him look much older. The grey at his temples blended upwards into his light brown hair streaked with silver. He resettled a rough canvas pack on his shoulders and pulled his long patched cloak further around his body to ward off the oncoming chill. Selden's head whipped around as he heard a faint rustle coming from behind him. As he did, he saw several faint shapes creeping through the long shadows. The goblins had green skin with long ears and equally long noses. They stood about a metre and a bit tall. The goblins held jagged short swords and were covered in ragged armour, cobbled together to fit their small frames. Selden pulled a hand axe from under his coat and levelled it at the goblin in the lead. "Stay away! I don't want to hurt anyone!" he cried with a panicked air in his voice. The lead goblin smiled, baring its chipped, sharp teeth, then barked an order over his shoulder to the other goblins. They jumped at Selden. The first one to jump got knocked aside with a flat of Selden's axe and was sent in a shallow arc screaming into the trees. This blow opened him up to attack by the other goblins, and they seized the chance. The others leapt on his weapon arm. Selden was knocked to the ground and swarmed by the goblins, and the axe was pried from his hand. Selden struggled as the goblins rolled him onto his stomach and began to pull his pack off. The next item to go off was his coat. The goblin seemed satisfied at that point and tied his hands with rough leather cord. Selden stopped struggling and lay face down on the ground, watching the goblins as they ripped the top of his pack open and spilled his meagre possessions onto the ground. They picked past his bowl and spoon without much interest to get to his skinning knife, which was shortly claimed by the largest goblin. His coin pouch caused a brawl between three goblins, which resulted in the pouch being torn and coins flying everywhere. The sun had disappeared by this point, and the moon would rise in the next 10 minutes. Only the residual sunlight remained, painting the skies a light yellow. A small goblin hopped over to Selden and started tugging on his shirt. The largest goblin noticed what was happening and wandered over smugly, Selden's skinning knife at his belt. The larger goblin shoved the smaller one aside and yanked on his shirt, ripping it off, exposing Selden's bare back and several scars, most prominent among them a large bite mark on Selden's forearm. The last traces of sunlight had now completely disappeared from the sky, and the moon peeked over the horizon, casting a faint but harsh white light. "Run!" Selden yelled. The goblins barked at each other and did not notice the faint, misty lines creeping from the bite mark on Selden's arm. Selden looked up one more time at the goblins. As he did, they watched his eyes turn yellow. The goblins dropped their weapons and bolted away from Selden and towards where the sun had disappeared over the horizon in the distance. Selden lay on the ground, writhing. His fur seeped up his back and onto his face. His nose elongated and his limbs turned into legs covered in grey fur. His ears pointed and his tail grew from between his legs. He crawled forward and out of his clothes. The leather binding slipped easily off the wolf's paws. Last of all, as Selden stood fully upright, he felt his mind get fully enveloped by that of a starved and depraved wolf. Selden lived with the wolf in the back of his mind for a long time, and he still constantly had to fight it. But tonight, the wolf always won.